Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. It's just a little bit after 1 o'clock. I'm Sue Couch. I'm a member of the Science, Medicine, and Technology Committee, and I'm really excited to bring the EV update on EV cars and charging. It's almost an annual class that we offer because so much is changing in this arena. So you're going to learn lots and lots today. Just a couple of things I need to mention before we start. Please silence any of your mobile devices if you have not done already. We also want to welcome the crowd joining us on Zoom, and a special thank to our course coordinators, Frank and Joan Carney, for supporting our hybrid modality. One other reminder, our monthly program is next Tuesday morning, and they're going to welcome a Holocaust survivor who, I'll never get this name, Tova Friedman, to our monthly program next week. It's at the Miller Auditorium. Coffee, cookies, and conversations begin at 9. Students, faculty, staff, and the community are all welcome. Tova will be available following the program to greet you and sign copies of her memoir, The Daughter of Auschwitz. You can purchase your own from the Hope College Bookstore or Reader's World. On the day before, Monday, October 9th at 3 p.m., you can be introduced to Tova's story when we screen the documentary Surviving Auschwitz, written by HAS member Milt Newsma. This free screening at the Knickerbocker Theater will be followed by a panel featuring the film's director, writer, and producers. We hope you can join for both of these events. Date of what? I'm sorry. That's Monday, October 9th at 3 p.m. Okay, now to introduce our class today. As I mentioned, it's our annual update on electric vehicles. We have 2 of our HAS members that some of you might find very familiar. They've given several classes, both of them have. Gary Morris, he's got a BA, MSc, and PhD. And for the last 10 years of his career in the federal government, he was in charge of the IRS artificial intelligence. He's owned a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, and a battery electric car. The other presenter is my husband, David Couch. He served for 22 years as senior vice president and CIO at Spartan Nash, where he was responsible for all business systems, technical infrastructure, and communications technology. David has over 50 years of experience in information tech and retail, wholesale, and manufacturing organizations. He holds a BA and MA degrees from the University of Arizona. And I also want to mention he also owns an EV that he'll talk about today. So let's welcome both our presenters today.
Thank you, Susan. Am I coming through? Okay. Ordinarily, I would start by saying that all questions are best when fresh, and so please interrupt me if you have any questions. However, the curriculum committee decided we didn't really need 2 sessions to deal with these topics. They put them together, and so we're going to really have a time crunch. So I'm going to ask you to hold your questions until the end of the first presentation, and then we'll take questions briefly while we're switching to the slides for the second presentation. Okay? All right. I'm going to do a quick EV update. We'll discuss, again, what the 3 types of EVs are. We're going to talk a lot about batteries because there's been a whole lot of action in that in the last year. We're going to review not individual cars, but simply the companies and look at what their electrification strategies are. And we'll do a review of the EVs that you are available to buy now or that you can order for delivery next year. Dave is going to talk about charging networks, types of chargers, home charging, charging on the road, and tools that you can use. Now, there are 3 types of EVs. The first and least complicated is a pure hybrid. Pure hybrids have no plug. All the electricity comes from the engine, which means it's being generated by fossil fuels, but they also have regenerative braking, which turns out to be quite an efficiency enhancer. There's no such thing as range anxiety because you just fill them with gas. There's a very small price premium over pure gas vehicles in most cases. And there are some amazingly efficient things out there. I think the current model Toyota Camry full-size sedan hybrid is rated at 51 miles per gallon. Now, you know, if you can't do anything else to help the planet, you can buy a pure hybrid and you will be reducing fossil fuel consumption, and that helps. These do produce a small reduction in greenhouse gases, and you can get most body types in a pure hybrid if you're looking for them. The second type of an EV is a plug-in hybrid. Now, a plug-in can be recharged with either 110 or 240 volt charging, usually in your garage or in what they call a level 2 destination charger. They also have regenerative braking. And again, there's no range anxiety. When the battery is drained, the engine starts. If you're driving 45 miles an hour and all of a sudden the engine starts, you won't even know it. Most of these will have between 25 and 50 miles of pure electric range, which means that if you're charging in your garage every night, all your local driving is going to be electric. So there is a significant reduction in greenhouse gases. Now, this does require a larger price premium, but you're not going to spend any money on gas except for long trips. The price premium on these is more significant because if you think about it, a plug-in hybrid is the most complex vehicle Detroit has ever made. It is a complete gas-powered car with transmission and all that stuff. It's a complete electric car with chargers, batteries, and so on, and all the engineering required to move smoothly from one to the other. They are really an engineering marvel. I owned a Honda Clarity plug-in hybrid, wonderful car, but they're very expensive to build. It's hard to make money building plug-in hybrids. But with a plug-in hybrid, you can make a significant contribution to the planet. And again, most body types are available as plug-in hybrids. The type that most people think of when you say EV is a battery electric. Those can be charged with 110 or 240 at your home, or you can fast charge them with a DC fast charger. And of course, they have regenerative braking. Driving battery electrics is just a joy. They're smooth, they're quiet, great torque. Everybody that drives one just says, man, my old car was clunky and slow. Most EVs have a range between 200 and 300 miles. A few of them have 400 or more. But as Dave will explain, long trips take planning. Now, there is definitely a price premium for buying a battery electric, but that premium is shrinking. In other words, if for a comparably equipped gas-powered car, the electric version still costs more, but not that much more. And there are virtually no maintenance costs. In addition to not buying gasoline, you're not going to pay for oil changes or anything. On my Mustang, you know, Barbara Ford would really love to get some of my money every quarter or so, but all they can sell me is tire rotation and windshield wipers. They're not going to make a whole lot of money with that. With an EV, a battery electric EV, there are no greenhouse gases. Now, some critics will say, yeah, but it creates greenhouse gases if you recharge it from an electric outlet that's being powered by coal. That's true. But the grid is becoming progressively greener. And so with an EV, if you're generating a little bit of greenhouse gas this year, 5 years from now, you won't. And again, there are SUVs, sedans, and pickup trucks available all as battery EVs. Now, with the battery EVs, the battery is about 30% of the cost of the vehicle. They are not cheap. There is tons of research going on by both independent research labs, startups, and the car makers themselves, aggressively seeking better, lighter, safer, cheaper batteries. Battery chemistry is an area of intense research right now. The dominant form of battery in any car that you have that's battery electric is going to be what they call a nickel manganese cobalt or NMC battery. That's what I have in my Mustang. 90% of the market has those, and there's a reason. The NMC battery has the highest energy density of any battery currently available. You get more bang for your buck with an NMC than you do with any other kind of battery. However, every once in a while, you know, they explode or catch fire. which is really not good for your PR. And normally with an NMC battery, you only want to charge it to about 80%. Because if you charge it beyond 80%, even on a fast charger, it's going to charge slower because it's getting to a difficult part of the charging range. But more importantly, that's going to tend to reduce the life of the battery. If you only charge to 80%, your battery is going to last longer. Therefore, they are not everybody's favorite, but they're right now what everybody has. Nickel, manganese, and cobalt are all rare materials. They come from strange places that sometimes use unsavory mining techniques, and the cost of these materials has soared in price. The current alternative to an NMC battery is a lithium iron phosphate, or LFP battery. Now, these are used widely in China. They also have a liquid electrolyte, so there is some small danger of fire. But they are cheaper, they're made from more abundant materials, there is less fire risk, and they have a much longer life with slower degradation. So an LFP battery is just going to last many thousands of miles more under the same driving conditions. The big deal is that an LFP battery can be charged to 100% every day. There is no problem with charging beyond 80, which means that if you have like my Mustang has an NMC battery that's rated at 247 miles, but I only charge it to 80%. So that's a little under 200 miles. If I had a Mustang next year, when they put LFP batteries in them, that battery may be rated at only 200 miles, but I can get the whole 200 miles every time I charge up. So in terms of usable range, LFP is a very reasonable thing to do. If you've been watching the news, maybe Ford will be building an LFP factory in Marshall. If anybody knows the real story behind that, please tell me. Some people think that this is just a bargaining ploy with the UAW during the strike. I don't know what's going on. But if Ford, I mean, they've already spent $1 billion preparing for that site. I would sure hate to see them abandon that. If Ford proceeds to build that factory, it will be the second LFP battery factory in the United States. Tesla has the first one. And if they stick to their current schedules, they're going to be producing batteries in volume by 2026. That's going to be a really big deal because LFP batteries are much less expensive to make. Now, currently, Ford is planning to buy LFP batteries from the Chinese people that invented it, the CATL. And they claim that soon, if you order a Mustang standard range, it will have an LFP battery in it. And next year, they're going to start putting them in the standard range F-150s. Currently, if you buy a standard range Tesla Model 3 that's been built in Austin, Texas, it has an LFP battery. They've been putting them in for about 2 years, and my understanding is that the people love them. The alternative to these lithium-ion batteries with a liquid electrolyte is called a solid-state battery. And there are a number of companies in the US and around the world that are doing great things with solid state. QuantumScape is considered to be the industry leader. It's a US company, but Volkswagen is the major investor in it. In their SEC filing last year, they revealed that 4 of the top 10 global automakers have already signed contracts to evaluate and potentially use their solid state battery. One of them, they didn't say who, but my guess is Volkswagen, has proposed to build a 50 gigawatt factory in the United States, which would produce enough batteries for 500,000 cars a year. Now, they're hoping to have volume production by 2025. And with their solid state battery, their claim is that you can go from dead empty to 80% in 15 minutes. That would be quite an improvement over the current. Another company in the US is called Solid Power. BMW is their major investor. Now, they're already producing solid state batteries, but for small devices like phones and laptops. They're building a pilot plant for automobile-sized batteries, and they're projecting that it will be used in cars. They don't say whose, but my guess is BMW, by 2028. Toyota, famous Japanese company, has been doing solid state battery research for about 3 years now. They have over 1,000 patents in solid state batteries. They've been pouring a ton of money into it. Now, they announced last year that starting in 25, they were going to be putting a small solid state battery in the Prius to get some real world experience with how it does in various kinds of weather and conditions. But recently, they blew everyone's mind by announcing that they had achieved a breakthrough in solid state battery manufacturing, the ability to produce these at scale and in volume. They claim that they can produce an automotive battery with a 700-mile range that can be recharged in 10 minutes. A lot of people are saying, good luck with that. If this was some, Asian startup, I'd say, yeah, sure, right. This is Toyota. I mean, they are not exactly the lunatic fringe of the auto industry. So I'm really hoping that they can pull it off. And I'm really hoping that they'll license that battery to everybody else, because that is a true game changer. There's an Israeli company called StoreDot that has used a different approach. They have developed special alloys for the anode and cathode that use organic materials. Don't ask me more about that. I don't understand it. But they claim that right now they have demonstrated that they can add 100 miles of range in 5 minutes with their organic alloy cathodes. And they claim that there is no degradation with repeated charging. So you could presumably charge the thing every day if you wanted to, adding 100 miles in 5 minutes. Their major investors are Volvo and Mercedes. And right now, supposedly, they have announced that their batteries are being evaluated by one US company and several European makers. Volvo and Polestar have already announced their partnership. There's a new company that has shown up recently called Lighten. They're US. Their major investors are FedEx and Stellantis. That's the Fiat Chrysler people. Lighten made a discovery some years ago about that they call 3D graphene. It's a proprietary super material. By that, they mean graphene is something that has tremendous electrical and physical characteristics, but normally it's not practical for use because graphene in its natural state is a sheet of graphite that is only 1 atom thick. A little hard to work with. They came up with a way of making graphene that is much thicker. It's 3-dimensional. They say that it's kind of like if you took that 1 atom thick sheet and crumpled it like a piece of paper, you get lots of extra edges. All of the useful properties of graphene come on the edges. So this they consider to be a breakthrough. They have developed what they call a lithium sulfur battery that's made with this proprietary graphene. It has twice the energy density of lithium ion. Twice the density, but 40% lighter. Since weight is one of the big problems with electric vehicles, this has got a lot of people's attention. Now, this battery takes no exotic materials like nickel or magnesium. So 100% of the materials for a lithium sulfur battery can be sourced from America. They have a pilot production line that opened this year, and they have promised that they have a contract that says they're going to send automotive scale samples to Stellantis that they can test in actual vehicles next year. And bottom line, although one always has to take with a grain of salt when they project costs, but they're projecting that this could actually be cheaper per unit of electricity than an LFP battery. That would make it the cheapest battery source available. Again, let's hope they're right. One other thing, silicon composite anodes are being investigated. Most anodes in like my car and Dave's car are made from graphite. Everybody knows that silicon can hold more ions, but silicon used as an anode tends to have problems. It develops instabilities. It tends to wear out very quickly. So silicon has not really been a practical material to use in anodes. But some companies have developed composite anodes. These are basically still graphite anides that have silicon nanowires embedded in them. This gets rid of the problems with stability and longevity, but it greatly increases the amount of electricity that can flow through that anode. A leading company in this area is called Scylla. They're in Washington State. They're already making nano composite silicon anodes. Say that fast. And just putting that anode into a standard NMC battery can increase the range by 20%, according to their claim. And they also claim that charging times are improved so that you can charge from 10% to 80% in about 20 minutes. They're working on a second generation of their anode that they claim will be even stronger. Next year, the Mercedes EQG, which is their electric SUV, is going to be using the composite anode from Scylla. So if you want to have the very latest, be the first kid on the block to have a silicon anode composite by a Mercedes. One of their competitors is called 1D Battery Science. It's a California company. General Motors is heavily invested in them, but there haven't been any fancy announcements. GM is treating that as just one possibility. Another company in Washington State is called Group 14. They're building a factory for silicon blend anodes, but they haven't announced any automotive partners yet. Of course, the big question with all these announcements is, yeah, but when can I buy one? The rule of thumb is from a demonstration in the lab to actually having something in the real world normally takes about 5 years because it's one thing to discover what you can do. It's another thing to figure out how you can do it at a reasonable cost and reasonable time, et cetera, et cetera. Every automaker is dying to get cheaper, faster charging batteries, and they're quite happy to hurry. But, you know, a new car design used to take 7 years to design a new car from a clean sheet of paper. Now it's more like 4 because of computerized planning, but still, they have a lot of work to do to integrate any new component into a car, especially if it's part of the powertrain, and especially if it's electronic. I mean, every component has to interface with every other component in the car, because if one of those interfaces doesn't work, the car may not work. And it's one thing to produce a battery that does something cool in a laboratory bench, but what about in a snowstorm in Minnesota or in a heat wave in Austin, Texas? What about in a flood? There's just all kinds of testing that has to be done to make sure that this is really practical for selling to customers. And, you know, they've got to find and fix points of failure. As you may know, when the Tesla Model S was first introduced, it got a wildly enthusiastic reception. Everybody loved them until some people discovered that all of a sudden their battery didn't work. And it turned out the problem was the way they had designed the floor pan above the battery allowed condensation to gather at a particular point. And when the condensation was sufficient, it would drip down into the battery, and dripping water into the battery caused it to eventually fail. It took them years to find that. It just takes a long time to work out all the details. I have a 23 Mustang Mach-E, and it's got a conventional NMC battery. In 28, I may be able to buy a car with a solid-state battery, or maybe a silicon composite anode, or an LFP, or who knows what. We're just going to have to wait and see. But there are tremendous things happening that probably are going to make electric cars more and more affordable, more and more desirable as the years come on. I want to quickly go through the electrification strategies of the major companies because they're taking different approaches. First, let's start with General Motors and Honda. GM was, very aggressive at first. They came out with the Volt, the plug-in, and They challenged Tesla when Tesla said they were going to come out with a Model 3 that would be inexpensive. Mary Barra said, we're going to come out with an electric car that's inexpensive before you do. And they did. They beat them to market with the Bolt. These cars were well received, but GM never made a dime on them. They were just not profitable. R&D focus at GM for the last several years has been on the battery pack, but not the battery chemistry itself. GM has been researching how do you manage the batteries? How do you keep them at the right temperatures and the right conditions? How do you cut down the cost of managing the batteries? What they've come up with is called the Ultium platform, and it has gotten pretty good reviews. The Ultium platform is battery management. It is motor types. It is connectors. It's the whole ecosystem, not just the battery itself. For anything in the automotive industry, volume means that you can cut the cost. And GM knew that they need to have some higher volumes in order to make Ultium work. They entered into a partnership with Honda. Primary purpose was simply to gain more vehicles that would run on the Ultium platform. Currently, GM offers the Hummer, the Cadillac Celestiq, the Cadillac Lyriq. Those are all on the Ultium platform. And they also are still selling the Chevy Bolt, which uses the old, more expensive conventional battery. Now, for next year, they've had a lot of announcements. Chevy is going to be selling the Silverado pickup truck, all electric, next year. They're making a lot of noise about this. They're really hoping to make a dent in Ford's F-150 sales. I'd love to talk more about that, but we don't have time. But there's some really cool features in the Silverado, and they're announcing fairly aggressive pricing for those that order them early. Also next year, I got a notice from Chevy that if I wanted to go ahead and order my Blazer, I could actually start to price it out now. By spring, they expect to be delivering Chevy Blazers electric, which are full-sized SUV. By next fall, they expect to be delivering the Chevy Equinox, which is a compact SUV. And those will all be on the Ultium platform. In addition, at the plant in Tennessee where they build the Lyriq, they're also going to be building Honda Prologue and Acura ZDX. Now, these are not just Cadillac Lyriqs with a Honda badge on the front. These are cars that were designed by Honda. They're going to look, feel, and drive like a Honda, and hopefully will be as reliable as a Honda, but they rest on the Ultium platform. So if you're a Honda fan or an Acura fan, that's something to keep an eye on. They expect to be delivering them next year. And probably like everybody else, at first, it's going to be hard to even find one at a dealership because they're going to be slow ramp up. But that should be a very interesting car to look at. Pricing may be fairly aggressive. I'm going to keep my eye on that. GM is currently building 3 battery factories outside of Michigan with LG, our favorite local company. They're also tripling the Holland plant, and they've just told me that there's been an additional additional announcement of $3 billion to make even more. So Holland is going to be a real battery manufacturing center by the time they get done with all the expansions. GM is alone in that they have declared by 2035, they are no longer going to make gas-powered cars. They will be all electric by 2035, no ICE vehicles of any kind, anywhere. That is a bit of leadership. Ford was a little bit late to the market, but the Mustang and the F-150 really caught people's attention, and they've sold very well. Ford is partnering with the Chinese company CATL for LFP batteries. We've already talked about that. Currently, Ford is offering the Mustang Mach-E, the F-150 Lightning, and if you're in the mood for a van, the E-Transit van. They only have one model announced for 24, and that is that they're going to have a battery electric version of the Explorer, which I think is their large SUV. They have said that by 2030, in Europe, they will be selling only electric cars, no more gas-powered. but they have not committed to doing the same thing in this country. Ford has supported California's mandate. California has said that after starting in 2035, it will be illegal to sell a gas-powered vehicle in the state of California. And other states that follow California's environmental rules, like New York, are probably going to follow that. Ford has supported it, but they said they'll still sell a gas vehicle to anybody that wants one. Toyota has certainly been late to market. Their only battery electric vehicle right now is the BZ4X, and sales have been frankly disappointing. Toyota is very strong in hybrids and plug-in hybrids, and they intend to keep manufacturing those until people don't want them anymore, and they make really good ones. Currently, they only offer the BZ4X and a Lexus version of that that's called the RZ450E. And of course, their Prius and RAV4 lines and the other hybrid and plug-ins. They have made no announcements about anything coming in 24, but a couple of weeks ago, they made a stunning announcement saying that they'd come up with this breakthrough that I talked about, the 700-mile range with incredibly fast charging. If that battery breakthrough, in fact, pans out, speculation is that that's going to trigger the creation of a whole new line of cars, that Toyota would put that battery in a variety of vehicles because it should be a real popular thing. But that's all assuming that the battery announcement, in fact, pans out. Toyota, like others, has announced that in Europe, by 2035, they will no longer sell gas-powered vehicles, but in the United States, they're going to continue to sell vehicles that take fossil fuels if people will buy them. VW Group is another group that was kind of late to market. Volkswagen has only one model available, the ID.4, and frankly, sales have been somewhat disappointing. But the VW Group includes Porsche, Audi, Bentley, Lamborghini, and a few others. Some of these are supercars and luxury cars. They're all switching to pure battery electric, but they're doing it slowly. These are low volume manufacturers. They just don't have the money to do a complete changeover instantly. But all of those premium vehicles are going to become battery electric within the next 5 years. Currently, all VW offers is the ID.4 in the US. There's a smaller version called the ID.3 that they're selling only in Europe. They have announced that next year, they'll be selling what they call the ID.7. That is a vehicle that is very similar to the Tesla Model 3, and they're hoping that they can make a dent in Tesla's sales. Good luck with that. What everybody is kind of buzzing about, the rumor mills, they have shown a prototype of what they call the ID Buzz. That's the old Volkswagen microbus. I had a couple of those. They were a hoot. And a battery electric Volkswagen microbus, could end up being painted with flowers and driven by hippies. Who knows? But everybody is waiting for them to announce when that is going to be available. They still are showing it as a prototype. They have not made any announcement about production. VW has said that by 2033 in Europe, they will sell only electric vehicles. But again, they're going to continue selling gas cars in the US so long as people buy them. Stellantis, that's the group that owns Fiat, Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, and so on. They've been very late to market. They only have one vehicle. That's the Jeep Wrangler 4xe. That's really a niche product, and that's the only vehicle they have right now. Their only announcement is that next year they're going to start selling something intended to compete with the Silverado and the F-150. It's going to be a Ram 1500, and they've made some pretty wild claims about its range and power. Of course, Ram has always been kind of a power trip, I think. I don't think they've announced pricing. It'll be interesting to see what they can do with pricing with a really strong, which means big battery, which means expensive battery, see what they can do with that. And they've said that by 2030, they will be selling only electric cars in Europe. And they've also said that their goal is to sell 50% electric cars in the US by 2030. That's the strongest pledge we've had from anyone except General Motors. Finally, Hyundai Kia. They weren't even in these slides until a couple of weeks ago, but they made the announcement about 10 days ago that the existing plant that they have in Georgia, which has been building conventional gas-powered Hyundais, is going to be converted strictly to EV production. And in addition, they're going to build several new factories, all of them in the South, that are going to make more EVs and batteries. All of the Hyundai Kia factory capacity in the United States is going to be for EVs within a few years. Furthermore, they've announced that next year, in addition to the EV6 and the Ioniq 5, which are their current, and the Hyundai Kona, they're going to bring out what they call the EV9. That will be a Kia that's a 3-row SUV. It's going to have their 800-volt architecture, which is really cool. And the base price, $56,000. I'm not a 3-row SUV guy, but they tell me that's a pretty competitive price. If they can hold to that, they ought to sell a few. By 26, roughly, when their southern factories are producing the batteries and assembling the cars, all their EVs will qualify for the full federal tax credits. And that's going to be a big deal for them. Now, they have not made any commitment to stop making ICE vehicles. However, they were really big into hydrogen vehicle research, and they have pulled the plug on that. It's going to be electric. So let's talk about the EVs that are available now or soon. All of you got by email a spreadsheet, has 140 some vehicles listed. I'm not going to go through all of those, but that spreadsheet has basic data for almost all of the 23 models and any 24 models that have been announced. There's a section on pure hybrids, a section on plug-in hybrids, and another section on battery EVs. Now, when it comes to prices, I want you to take a little bit of salt and sprinkle it on the spreadsheet. I picked up the base prices for the 23s back in April. And the 24s, I took the base prices from the announcements they made in September. But as you know, there's a price war going on. Tesla has cut the prices on their vehicles. Some companies have tried to cut their prices in response. Other companies that are experiencing manufacturing difficulties are raising their prices. Take all these prices with a grain of salt, but this will give you the ballpark of where they are. Now, the federal tax credit data is current as of 2 weeks ago. This applies only to sales. If you want to lease an EV, you can lease a vehicle whose battery and car all come from a foreign country. If you lease it, the leasing company can still claim the full federal credit. If they are willing to pass that credit on to you in the lease calculation, then in effect, you can get the federal credit benefit. But it doesn't affect your tax return. It affects the tax return of the leasing company. Just to emphasize my point, that arrow is pointing to the line for the Mustang Mach-E, which says that the Mustang Mach-E has a base price of just under $43,000. I paid a whole lot more for that car in December, but I got the full federal tax credit. Now the price has been reduced, but the federal tax credit has been reduced. Check prices carefully before you trust this. So model availability, rapidly increasing, and announcements coming all the time. And because of Tesla's price war, a lot of prices are coming down. Price came down on my Mustang. It's just kind of like computers. A few years ago, when there was still a lot of R&D going on, if you decided you want to wait until that next cool feature that had just been, rumored, you're going to wait forever. You'd never buy a computer because there's always going to be some new feature that's coming down the road. Electric cars are really the same way. If you decide that you aren't going to do anything until you can have a solid state battery, you're going to be waiting a long time. So my recommendation, if current models meet your needs, well, now's a good time to buy. There's a price war going on. And if you're interested in a Tesla, I understand that if you order a car off the current inventory, wait times are fairly short. But if you're absolutely determined, you want to wait for some future model or for a solid state battery or whatever you're waiting for, may I suggest that you consider leasing an EV and get the benefit of that federal tax credit if the dealer is willing to pass it on. And that's something you have to make sure of. It's a negotiating point. But if you still have range anxiety, you still aren't sure about this charging stuff that Dave's going to tell you about, well, buy or lease a plug-in. You'll find that some of the plug-ins on the spreadsheet qualify for the federal tax credit, full or partial. And there are over 30 models on that spreadsheet. So a plug-in hybrid is definitely an alternative if you really don't want to deal with trip planning. And if cash is short, you can buy a used EV. Now, under the Inflation Reduction Act, if you buy a used EV from a dealer whose cost is less than $25,000, and the car is at least, I believe, 2 years old, and there's a bunch of other conditions about, previous discounts on the car and your income and all that. Check the IRS website for all the rules. But nonetheless, most people can buy a used EV and get 30% of the price, up to $4,000, as a federal tax credit on their tax return. That's a pretty good deal. And that's for any EV. Doesn't have to be made in the US. Battery can come from anywhere. So check the IRS for the details, but that's also a possibility. I hope I haven't gone too much over my time. What questions or comments do you have? I will be glad to take them while Dave is coming up to the podium. Yes, sir.
If you buy a car now with an NMC or lithium ion or whatever, and one of the newer batteries comes out solid state, one of those others that I have no idea what you're talking about, would it be possible to switch out batteries?
Probably not. Especially with manufacturers that are trying to build the battery case into the frame or into the body. Switching out a battery is not going to be a possibility. Yes, ma'am.
Wanted to ask if they've made any improvements on the effects of weather conditions on batteries.
The answer is yes and no. Dave can probably talk more about that than I can because it affects charging rates. Some companies are doing things like my Mustang has over-the-air updates, and I just got an update last week that is now going to add some preconditioning of my battery when I'm using the Ford navigation system to drive to a charging port. I didn't have that before. That's an area people are working on, but definitely there's still, cold weather is still going to cost you range quite a bit in my case.
But Gary, about a year ago, you mentioned that 6 to 7% of new car sales in the country were of electric vehicles. What is that number now?
In California, it's 25%. In the U.S. as a whole, I think it's around 9.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting close to 10.
It's under 10%, but still, it's growing rapidly.
Is Tesla the best-selling car in the U.S. among EVs?
Tesla sells between 65 and 70% of all EVs worldwide and in the U.S. The best-selling vehicle of any type in the U.S. is the Ford F-150 pickup. The second best-selling car of any type is the Tesla Model Y.
Okay.
And I'll be talking about the Y. We have a Y.
And you may choose to discuss this after the presentation. The lobbying from the oil and petroleum industry, is it going to continue for a long time, or is their fate sealed?
Let's talk about that afterwards.
We have a couple of online questions. One is any info on the Tesla 4680 battery, and when will it be available from Big Storm?
The 4680, I think, is an LFP.
I think you're right. And so it's actually shipping in some cases.
So the 4680 LFP battery is being manufactured in Austin, Texas. And if you buy a Model 3 standard range in the eastern part of the country, because Austin handles only the east, you're getting an LFP 4680 battery. And supposedly, you know, they're working out really well.
Okay, and then Ned and Barb would like to know, what is the real MPG on a hybrid on a long trip with no local driving?
Did you say on a hybrid?
On a plug-in hybrid, I guess, with if you don't do any local driving, it's just a long trip, what would you expect?
Yeah, the spreadsheet has figures, I think, for combined MPG. My experience was that on my Honda Clarity, I could get 40 miles per gallon plus on the road on a long trip.
I was looking at my own question, I guess. I was looking at something the other day that had an 82-mile estimated MPG in a plug-in hybrid. And I was curious if you know anything about, like, how do they calculate something like that? Because it has to be based on a mix of local and long distance and all that.
Yeah, that would have to be. And, you know, it all depends on your assumptions. Okay, Dave, I don't want to take
just one quick
one
question.
more.
Any models that you're aware of from Subaru? I'm aware of their
forgive me, yes,
relationship with Toyota, and so you would think there might be something in the works, but I haven't heard of anything.
I should have mentioned Subaru has something called the Solterra. It's manufactured by Toyota, but it has some Subaru characteristics, like it's always all-wheel drive and so on. It's basically a strong cousin to the BZ4X. They're in very limited supply, but if you were to talk to a Subaru dealer, you could find out when they might be able to produce one. Okay.
Gary, I have one more question for me, for you about this. I had read recently that China has a huge push for electric vehicles over there. And one of their initiatives is that to register an EV car in that country costs $0. To register an ICE vehicle, it costs $10,000.
Yeah. So
that's a big motivation to do that. You've heard the same, read the same?
Well, that's true. And something like 50% of all the EVs sold in the world are sold in China. It's still by definitely the largest market. Dave, I didn't mean to take so much of your time.
No, okay. So he's the main part of the show. He's got to get you a car. After you get a car, then you have to know how to live with it. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about. So I'm going to talk about charging. I'm going to talk about the types of chargers. I'm going to talk about what it's like to set up charging in your house. I'm going to talk about what it's like charging on the road. And there's lots of tools, lots of apps out there, but I'm going to tell you about a couple that matter. You can really throw the rest away. And so I've got some videos, which I'm going to try and narrate, and then some final questions to ask when you're shopping. So let's talk about types of charging. So Gary alluded to, there's basically 3 levels of charging. The first level, you can think of it as a standard household outlet that you have in your house or your garage, or that are sitting around the room here somewhere. These a standard 110 volt outlet on the average. Now, by the way, I have a Tesla Y. I've had it for 2 years. So any personal experience I'm going to be talking about is going to be relative to the car I own. So the numbers will be generally correct for other models, other cars, but they'll vary a little bit. And so my comment is, if you plug a BEV, a full electric car, into a standard outlet, you're going to get about 4 miles an hour. And so, meaning not the speed, but the speed with which you get miles of battery charge into the car. So now that may not sound very productive, but actually there's many ways, and I know some people who use them a lot in terms of how you travel and charging and so forth. Level 2, typically what you do is you install a level 2 charger in your house, and we'll talk about that. That is a 220 volt. Think of a circuit that you would run to an electric dryer. It's a 220 volt, and then depending on the amperage, the size of the breaker and so forth, you can get different mileage. So we have in our house, I'll tell you, we have a 60 amp 220 circuit running out to a Tesla charger, and we get about 44 miles an hour, the rate at which it charges. And then DC fast charging. So, and we'll talk a little bit about how the cars are structured. and Gary's referred to, there's 400-volt systems, there's 800-volt systems. There's kind of two sides to that story. There is how the electronics and the battery system that are the part of the electronics in the car that drive the motors. They're oftentimes most of the cars on the road today are 400-volt systems. But as Gary alluded to, there's people coming out with 800-volt systems. And we'll talk about how that matters. And then there's also the connector, how the voltage the connector is running at. So there's actually two different cases. There's what's the internal electrical system, and then how does the charging work? So DC fast charging, that's what you do on the road. And you'll get varying rates, and we'll talk more about details. But there, in that case, you could be talking about several hundred miles an hour in terms of the charging rates. And as Gary has alluded to, they're all working on different batteries and they vary and so forth. But I will show you examples of sort of real world experience. So the basic thing to understand about this is there's a battery system runs on DC voltage, has a battery management system that controls temperature and so forth. And the level 1 and level 2, shown on the left-hand side of the screen, use an onboard charger converter, if you will, that converts from the AC voltage, whatever amount you're providing, into something suitable to charge the battery. In the case of DC fast charging, the converter is outside of the car. So the battery system is a DC-based battery system. And so the converter, to convert the high voltage coming from the utility to something suitable for the car, is in the cabinet that you're plugging into. So that's kind of a way to think of the difference. Connectors. Connectors, this is an evolving story. So a level 1 is a standard plug that you have on, a light at home or a hair dryer or whatever. The level 2 charging has some different connectors. In the US, the standard is what's called a J1772. Unfortunately, I don't have one of those up here, but you can see the picture down in the lower portion of the screen there. That's what the connector looks like. And when you go to these chargers, many of the chargers, that's the connector you will see. Tesla, because they were first, came out with a different charging standard, and we'll talk more about how that's evolving. And so you can see what the plug configuration is. And this is an example. Don't look behind the screen, but that's a Tesla connector. And so that's one case. And that's right now, that's exclusive to Tesla. What you find in the other cars that you purchase is what's known as a CCS type 1 connector. It's actually, they have different nomenclature, a combo connector and so forth. Actually, the J1772 is this portion, but the whole thing is a CCS connector. And so this happens to be an adapter for my Tesla, because when we bought a car, well, first of all, I'm kind of a geek and interested in all the technology and the power and how it all works. I didn't want to ever be in a position that I couldn't connect up and get a charge. And Tesla has the most amazing charging network, and we'll talk more about that. But when I went to northern Michigan or far off places where there wasn't a Tesla charger available, I wanted to be able to take a charge. So I bought this adapter. And so it is a CCS1 connector on one side, it is the Tesla connector on the other side. And so to me, if you're a Tesla owner, that's a must buy. I think it was $250. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. One time. Oh, have you? Yeah. And you could probably get non-Tesla versions that are cheaper. There's another connector, and again, pay no attention to the other side of the screen. This is what's known as a CHAdeMO. And this was originally pioneered by Nissan. And there are a couple other brands that used it, but it's fallen out of favor. And so there's still chargers out there that have it. Most DC fast. This is a DC fast connection. You'll see it in the list on the right hand side of the screen. You see the Tesla, the CCS, and then you see the CHAdeMO. I bought one of these because, again, I had this thing about I wanted to have a Tesla, but I wanted to charge anywhere. This they didn't announce for a year. This they had right away. This, don't buy this, but I did because I wanted to play and experiment, which I did, and whatever. This was $450. So anyhow, it was a learning exercise. All right. So last year, Tesla, at the same time I was doing a more extended version of this presentation, they announced the North American Charging Standard, NACS. And all as it was they introduced and made the specifications for their connector and the electronics and the communication that goes on between the car and the charging system. They published it out in the open and allowed anybody to use it. When they first happened, we were all kind of, oh, this is kind of interesting, and we'll see if this happens. Well, what the other manufacturers have learned is it's all about the charging network. When you want to travel distances, having chargers available is paramount. It's like if you drove and didn't have a gas station available, it's the same problem. And so if you're a Tesla owner, they were very strategic. They've been doing this for 10 years, and they've built charging stations all over the country. And we've done some long distance trips, and it's never an issue. It literally is never an issue. But the other manufacturers, and there's a story, I can't remember, it's the Ford CEO or something, just recently went on a trip a few months ago and was shocked at how hard it was to find DC fast chargers for, I think he was driving a Lightning or whatever. So anyhow, what's happened is over the last 6 to 9 months, the brands that I show listed have all announced that they are going to release cars starting in 2025 that support the Tesla connector and the Tesla link. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So this is a big deal. And it's a big deal because that charging network is so well developed. Now, my wife gets nervous because she goes, well, I don't want to pull up to a Tesla charging station and have all these other brands there, and I can't plug in my car. And so, but Tesla centrally monitors everything. That's one of the things that's interesting is the success rate. So you'll hear about charging services and the success rate of coming up to a charger and it actually working. Statistics and work has been done that shows that 96% of the time when you show up at a Tesla charger, they work. In the other brands, across all the different brands, it's somewhere between 60 and 70% success rate. So you hear a lot of stories, and ChargePoint recently announced their charging units that you're going to see are standalone. And now they're building a central monitoring system to keep track of them all to make sure they're in operation. So a lot of these other vendors are waking up and realizing, if you've only got a 60% success rate and you pull up and you're about ready to run out, that's a problem. And so anyhow, there's a lot of things going on in this particular space. So let's talk about home charging. So we're going to talk a little bit about connecting to your electrical system and some about the commercial offerings. So here's the basic concept. You have a breaker panel, and for example, BPW, if you want to put in a charger and you have to do a panel upgrade, they will give you I can't remember, you get a credit of like $1,000 for an upgrade of the panel if it's necessary. But anyhow, you put in a 220-volt circuit, again, like a dryer, and you pick the charger of your choice. And in our case, because we have a Tesla charger. But I know people have ChargePoints. I know people have Clipper Creeks. There's probably at least 30 different level 2 chargers on the marketplace. Ours cost the Tesla one we have was about $500, and it cost about $500 to be installed. And so anyhow, and what's important, if you look at that table, is the size of wire and the size of the circuit breaker that you add. So we put in a 60 amp breaker with corresponding wire. Can't remember if it's 4 gauge or 6, whatever. And so we get 44 miles an hour when we are at home charging the Tesla Y, which for a level 2 charger, that's a real good number. We'll talk more about that. This is our installation. the Tesla charger on the wall and plugged into the back of the Y. Home charging. So then the next thing is, what's it going to cost? Everybody wants to understand cost, and I've got some different things on that. But here's a dramatic difference between if you're a BPW customer in the city of Holland versus a consumer's energy customer and their rates. So our Tesla Y in consumers, it costs us about $1 for 30 miles. If you're in the BPW, that same car, it's about $1 for 55 miles. That's how dramatic the difference is. No, because in Holland BPW, I can get a heck of a lot more miles for the same dollar, right? Oh, I said it wrong. Well, that's sorry. 72, what can I tell you? Anyhow, so what's on the screen is correct. Sorry if I misled you. And so then the other thing, and Gary mentioned this too, with the current state of batteries, depending on what the level of charge is the battery, where your starting point and how far you go has a big effect on the speed. And so we typically, our day-to-day process, which I talk about in here, is we generally connect it up when we're going to be 100 miles or less on the battery. And our battery has a capacity of, a published capacity of 330 miles. I think the most we've seen is about 320. And so when we go below 100, we plug it in, and we normally set, again, Gary talked about that, both the wear on the battery and the speed of charge, we generally don't charge above 80%, which in our case gets us about 260 miles on a charge. And then if we're going to take a long trip, then we push it up to 100%, and we have a full charge the next morning. So anyhow, a little bit about home charging. So let's talk about charging on the road. So there's two types of chargers. Again, the level 2 and the level 3. Talk about the networks and availability. So level 2 chargers, like what we have in our home, are often referred to as destination chargers. And typically you find them at hotels, municipal offices, campgrounds, marinas, and businesses oftentimes will install them for their employees. And I probably have pictures of these in all these kinds of locations. Some are offered a hospitality as part of like if you go to Bay Harbor, really very expensive hotel, they have 4 Tesla chargers there. It's free. And they're all wired properly, so you get like 40 plus miles. Others may charge you, and sometimes they're part of a charging network, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So you see lots of different variabilities. The speed of charging varies widely. The most of them that we've seen anywhere from 16 to 40 miles per hour, the speeds or how they're wired. And in our experience, like I say, we've had the average, being Joe Analytical, there's an app you can buy from a Tesla. It downloads all the data from the car, and I pull in Excel spreadsheets. So I know our experiences in these different environments. And so we've seen about a minimum of 20 miles per hour to a maximum of about 45. It all depends on how they wire it and shared connections. My favorite story is my wife and I were up in Petoskey. There was a free charging connection in a downtown parking lot. It had 2 connectors. We plugged in, we went to the restaurant, and we were getting about 32 miles an hour, the rate at which the charger was. About halfway through dinner, I checked the Tesla app and it was down to 16. And what happened? And my wife, being the smarter of the two of us, said, another car pulled up and plugged into the other plug. And that's exactly what happened. We got back and there was another plug there. And so because they didn't wire it properly, in my estimation, they put us either a single circuit or a circuit not large enough. And so we split the energy and made a big difference in time. We enjoyed our dinner though, so it didn't matter. Anyhow, so here's examples. Actually, the offending charger is on the upper left, which actually now has been replaced by a different one. But these are all different brands. Some of these are network-based. Rivian, if you go out to the Holland State Park, you'll see the one that's second over from the left. The one third over is Blink. The fourth one over is the Bay Harbor. We we didn't stay at the hotel; it's too expensive. But we went to the restaurant. We plugged in, and by the time we got done with dinner, had a full charge. It's free. The dinner wasn't, but whatever. Anyhow, even the dinner was expensive, but the setting is pretty amazing. Anyhow, so you see, these are all different types of level 2 chargers. I can tell you about each one, but we don't really have the time. So level 3 charging. So DC fast charging or superchargers, as they're generally referred to. Typically, they're part of a network. And I'll show you the different networks. And anybody but Tesla, you have to, well, even that's changing now a little bit. You have to download their app on your phone. And so you sign up for a particular network. We'll talk more about that. But anyhow, the locations are generally strategically located along freeways. And for example, we went out to Philadelphia this summer. And in fact, I'm going to actually show you the navigation for that in a little video. There were Tesla chargers everywhere. In the Ohio and the Pennsylvania turnpikes, about every other service area has a suite of 8 to 12 Tesla superchargers. There's a state of Michigan was pretty sophisticated. They back in 2018, 2019, they got with the universities, ChargePoint, and some of the manufacturers, and they did an analysis of traffic throughout Michigan. And in terms of both residential traffic and visitors, vacationers, and so forth. And they did a traffic study, and based on that, figured out where DC fast chargers and level 2 chargers should be placed. So you could pretty much travel anywhere in the Michigan, UP, whatever, and have good charging ability. And so they set up a program where you could apply to the state. It was called Charge Up Michigan. And you could apply for money, for grants, to install supercharging stations. And for example, if you go down to outside or in Saugatuck at the Ronan Black Gallery or Penny Royale, you'll see there's a ChargePoint level 3 supercharger there. There's now a Red E supercharger, and there's level 2 charge. They did all that with grant money from the state of Michigan because it was in a region where they wanted to have chargers. Of course, now we have a Tesla charger at Meyer here in town. And so they announced the state of Michigan is putting chargers in all the state parks. It's kind of a slow rollout, but the Holland State Park was the first one they did. They're free for the first 2 years. The energy is provided by the grid provider here in the area, ITC. And then the national park has a program. And so the state, there's 4 national parks in our state. And so they're working to get those installed. And then business partners, in the case of Meyer has made a very good strategic decision. And so they are putting always Tesla superchargers and one other brand. Electrify America and ChargePoint are the 2 that I've seen so far. There's the Meyer in Hudsonville, the Meyer now here in town, the Meyer up in Muskegon, the Meyer in Ludington, the Meyer in Traverse City. And it's as an ex-retailer, really smart decision. So when you're doing level 3 charging, you're going to typically see, and this all depends on how much it's costing to get the utility to provide the energy to that location. What's their infrastructure look like? Like in the case of Ronan Black, you can go down there and you can see consumers had to rewire from the substation all the way up the road. They put in new poles, bigger wire, and so forth to be able to provide the amount of energy needed there. And so you'll see anywhere from a low end of about 50 to 72K up to 350. And we'll talk about how that equates to mileage. So between the energy the utility can provide and the equipment that is installed, you get varying levels of power. Most Tesla started out with 72 kilowatt hour chargers. Now they're all 250 kilowatts. And the electronics are good enough. They can switch them up to 375. They haven't yet because none of their cars can support that. But when the time comes, they can just go out the cabinets and reconfigure them. The 400 volt versus 800 volt, talked about that earlier. If the thing supports 800 volt charging and the 350 kilowatt chargers do, it cuts the charging time in half. But again, as Gary talked about, with the different battery configurations and so forth, there's no one pat answer. You have to do some homework and ask the dealer, and they'll talk about that as the questions to ask. Our experience, Tesla has, and Gary talked about this, preconditioning. Preconditioning is basically warming up the battery to an optimal temperature. So some cars support, and it sounds like yours now does, supports whether to precondition a battery or not. And in a Tesla, that's a big deal. And so it takes about 20 minutes to get the preconditioning to occur, depending on the temperature outside. And so our experience with an unpreconditioned battery is about a minimum of about 100 miles an hour to a maximum of about 500 miles an hour, with an average of about 248. Now, and then the maximum goes up to, the maximum average goes to 330 miles per mile per hour with preconditioning. What you got to understand is when you start, you first plug it in, under optimal conditions, the energy is flowing in at the rate of about 1,000 miles an hour. And then as time goes on and the battery fills up, the battery management system and the charger talk, and it levels off and goes down to this Gary talking, get in that last 80%, it's down to 100 miles an hour or whatever. It's very slow. And so typically you'll see quoted all the time in the news releases and stuff about charging to 80%. That's why they always talk about charging to 80%. Getting a battery to charge to 80% is X amount of time. So we talked about preconditioning. So here's an example of trying to add to our car, successfully adding to our car 171 miles with a non-preconditioned battery. It was 63 minutes. With a preconditioned battery, it was 26 minutes. So you can see it's a very dramatic difference. I don't have the time to go through the graph, but it makes a difference. So here are the charging networks. And getting this data is old because it's hard to come by, but it gives you a general indication. ChargePoint is by far the largest charging network in the country, but most of their chargers are level 2 chargers. They have level 3 chargers, but not. They're like level 2 chargers. There's ChargePoint level 2 chargers all over Holland. Electrify America, that's as a result of Dieselgate with VW and their agreement with the US government. So they have a very nice charging network. And again, these numbers are probably small by comparison, but they're growing. EV Connect, you don't see as much out in the larger metropolitan areas. You see EVgo. They make a very good charging network. JuiceNet, you'll see those at Ford Airport. They're generally level 2 chargers. Tesla has its network, and Volta is kind of interesting. You'll see those in malls, and they have the charger has a big screen on it, and they flash advertising. They're free. They're only level 2 chargers and not real fast. But the way they're paying for it is they charge the brands money for the ads that flash on the screen. There's always a way to make money, right? So here's an example of, and we've used all these, some cases a lot, some cases not so much, but the first stack of 2 photos on the left, that's Electrify America. EVgo, you see their new charger up above and the older version below. ChargePoint, actually that's from Ronin Black. Blink, that's up in Petoskey. And then a very standard looking Tesla supercharging location. They all look that way. Sometimes they have to jam them in, but generally it's a row of 8 or 12, and that's what they look like. Legacy automakers, again, because they're learning that, hey, this is a big deal. They've announced, BMW, GM, Honda, and so forth, everybody on the list, they've announced that they're going to build a charging network. None of it exists yet, and so we'll see how that goes. Partnership, Honda has done is announced application integration with Electrify America. The big difference here, and this is one my wife will always highlight for you, is when you go to a Tesla supercharger, you plug in, and that's it. There's a conversation that goes on that identifies your VIN number. It looks up your account. You do the charging. When it's all done, your account gets charged. You see the transaction go against your bank. That's all you do. Everybody else, you got to fire up an app. whether it's Electrify America or ChargePoint or Blink or EVgo. I've got all the apps on my phone. I've registered my bank card. And so you come up and you hold the phone to the charger and they do a Bluetooth conversation. Okay, now you can charge and away you go. Electrify America has now got a thing where if you go in and put in your VIN number in the app for certain units, they now will automatically do that. So again, the frustration and the simplicity of the Tesla charging network is significant. All right, so a little comparison here for costs, and these vary. Gary was talking about, I had a first generation Tesla hybrid. And so I only got 35 miles at 34, 38 on an optimal situation. Now it's 50. But even if you do the math at 50, to put 200 miles in is about $12, or at $4 a gallon, it's $20. Our Tesla Y at home, it's if I'm in BPW range, put 200 miles in is $3.48 to put on consumers at $6.40. The level 3 charger is $20. So if you equate that to the Camry hybrid, it's about the same amount of money on the supercharging, where you're saving all your money is at home. And so when you're on the road and you go to a supercharger, you're paying a typical amount of money. It's not that much different than gas. In the case of time, you tell me how long you spend when you go to a gas station. I put in 10 minutes. Is that long? Is that short? I don't know. If you go to a supercharger, it's worst case is maybe 30 minutes. You'll see when I go through the demo here, it's can be only 15 or 20 minutes, depending. So it varies. So tools, PlugShare. Forget anything else. Download PlugShare. This is a PlugShare, and there's a you can interface. There's a web interface and there's an application interface, and so I'm on the web, and so this is a picture of what the chargers look like in Holland from PlugShare. PlugShare is a crowdsourced app, but it's really good. And so all the green pins are level 2 chargers, and the orange pins are level 3 chargers. So you can see the one on the left, you can see Meyer, and then down in Saugatuck, you see the charge point for our area. So anyhow, that's PlugShare. And then if you select a pin, this is all the information that comes up. It tells you what kind of connectors it has, if it's integrated, and then so forth. It'll tell you if they're in use or not. And so I picked some different locations. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate 2 more things, and then we'll be done. And the first thing is something called a better route planner. This is a application. You can run it on the web, or you have it on your phone. It is an outstanding route planner. It's probably one of the best. And so I'm going to attempt to describe, I'm going to play a video of me operating it and try and provide commentary as we go. So now let me start it again, sorry. So the first thing I'm going to do, let's see. I'm a mouse guy. All right, so I'm just going to pick it up from there because the pad is I'm not accustomed to pad. First thing you do is you set up parameters, and you only do that once. Once you set up your parameters of the type of car, and you're going to see all the questions it asks. So for example, you see the plan settings over on the right. As I've selected the Tesla Model Y 2021 long range. And I've talked about, my departure state of charge is 100%. I'm saying when you optimize a route, you can see on the right, it says quickest arrival. You can adjust all these things. So I'm going to continue playing it and try and narrate. And where we're going, in case you're wondering, is we're going to go to the Franklin Institute. It's a really cool technology museum in downtown Philadelphia. So that's what you're going to see here. Is me, if I can keep this mouse under control. Oh, we didn't want to do that yet. what my plan was to go, all right. My plan is to demonstrate a better route planner and demonstrate the Tesla. What's built in the Tesla. So, all right, I specified the car. I specified the departure charge, the optimum rate we want to go. I'm not going to show you my credit card. Chargers. What chargers do I want to support? I want a Tesla supercharger, Tesla CCS, and any CCS chargers. And I'm willing to do Tesla, ChargePoint, Electrify America, and EVgo. But they're all out there. I'm going to select a battery. I don't want it to go below 20%. My arrival, my wife would have a heart attack. And don't charge it more than 80%. My average speed, 75 miles an hour. Maximum. I tend to drive a little slower with an electric EV. It's more efficient. The vehicle, and what I did here is I put in 200 pounds of extra weight. My wife doesn't weigh 200 pounds, but my wife and luggage is 200 pounds. So then I say, okay, I'm going to put in our home address. And then I'm going to say, I want to go to the Franklin Institute. It says, okay, that's where you want to go. I punch the button and say, optimize the route. And it comes through and it says, here's the route you should drive. You want to stop in Dundee. You're going to have, you'll have 25%, down to 25%. It'll take you 25 minutes to get to 77%. And then it just tells you for each location, how much charge you're going to have, how long to charge, and then time to move on. And so it does that. And in this particular case, the first one it selected was from ChargePoint. The other four were from Tesla. Now, the interesting thing you're going to see when I do this at Tesla, this is saying I have to charge 5 times. When you see Tesla, we're only going to charge 4 times. We probably don't. You don't have to see anything. Okay, where is it? 11 hours and 17 minutes. 750. So there's another point of data. My wife and I, because this was our first big long trip, and so we went out to Philadelphia. We went out over 2 days. We stopped at Falling Water, Frank Lloyd Wright's deal, just because we didn't know. And so on the way back, we said, okay, we've learned enough now. This is not a problem. We can do this in a day. And so we drove 800 miles in 1 day. And we did all the calculations. We saved a boatload of money from a gas and cost standpoint. I think we figured it was a third of the price. Well, we figured it was a third of a price compared to driving Sioux Suburban. So, maybe it's half price for a normal car, but whatever. And then the other thing we figured out is that it probably added an hour to the day in terms of what you would normally go to a convenience store. Most times, and you'll see the Tesla in a minute, when you do it integrated with the car, it says, go here, you'll be at this battery charge for 15 minutes. And then go there and charge for 20, drive for 2.5 hours or whatever, charge for 15 minutes and so forth, and give you all that feedback. When you're charging there, it comes up and says, as you're charging, it says you now have enough energy to go to continue your trip. Now, being conservative, we say, okay, we're going to let it charge a little longer, but it tells you, you can keep charging, but it tells you. So I'm running out of time here. I apologize. So let's now do the Tesla. Now, this is Sue and I doing a video in the car. This is our screen on the car. So you can see there's our house with the little red arrow. You can also see in the upper left, if you can get past my finger, it's 313 miles are in the battery. I'm now typing in the name for the Franklin Institute. It says low tech, you could speak it in. There comes Franklin Institute up on the menu. So I select it. Goes off and calculates. And there it says it's going to do 4 charges. It says, here's the route to drive. Tells you all the routing information. You can see it wants us to go to a charger and Ohio Turnpike, the Tiffin Plaza. There's 8 stalls available. They're 250 kilowatts. It's going to be 2 hours and 50 minutes. And we'll arrive at 11:02 a.m. In the morning. It's 171 miles, and we'll have a 33% battery left. If you look for where my finger is. And while you're doing this, it'll tell you as you go along, you're going to have this much energy left. And so forth. It tells you the rates. You can see there's charging fees there. Again, this is 8 stalls available, 250 kilowatts. You can see the charging fees are 30, it looks like 39 cents per kilowatt hour. And idle fees. Most of these charging setups, if you park there and you're not charging, if you charged and you're done and you leave the car there, the meter keeps running. So sometimes it's $1, 15 minutes, whatever. Anyhow, so they tell you that. I think this is getting to be it. There's one other thing I want to show you here in a minute, and then we're done. Apologize, we're kind of jammed here for time, but my original class was an hour, and so I tried to strip a bunch of stuff out. Gary has much better data on all the batteries. He keeps track of it better than I do. So the last thing I want to show you, if I can get my finger down there, is there's settings. You can select different settings, and in doing so, it tells you how you want to optimize the trip. Down at the bottom, you can see I can avoid ferries, I can avoid toll roads, use HOV lanes, and so forth. So there's a bunch of parameters that you can modify for the optimizer. So anyhow, if you're buying a car, obviously, Gary talked so well about vehicle range, what's your battery capacity in miles, what connectors are supported and are adapters available, does it support level 3 charging, is the charging 400 volts or 800, has a big difference. Most of the headers, we talked about Porsche. You can buy a Porsche Taycan if you've got a couple $100,000 hanging around. And it's got an 800 volt charging system. Does it support preconditioning? And the over-the-air upgrades, software upgrades are very common. And Gary was talking about how he now has the preconditioning available. Does it come with a charging contract? You could buy a Kia and you typically get free 1,000 miles of Electrify America on your account. And so you get 1,000 miles free. And then what kind of route planning software does it have? Tesla's is pretty sophisticated. I don't know how the other is. Everything I've seen in other ones, it is not as good. So anyhow, sorry, ran out of time. Questions?
Dave, I just wanted to ask you about driving in colder conditions, winter conditions for charging.
That question came up earlier. Our experience with our Tesla is, first of all, when it's the winter time, we keep it plugged in all the time because the battery management system keeps the battery at an optimal temperature in our garage. But generally, what you're going to see is somewhere between 20 and 25% degradation. At least that's been our experience on our car. And my understanding is that's pretty common at this point. And Gary talked about new batteries that are coming along. Other questions?
The one thing I'm not totally clear about is, sounds like these different vehicles have different plugins or connectors.
They're either going to be this or they're going to be this. Virtually all the American automotive manufacturers are going to have CCS1 connectors. And they're all going towards the Tesla connector in 2025. So it's really, those are the two.
So does that mean any of these charging stations I go to, I'll be able to plug into without all kinds of adapters and things like that?
And if you look in that plug share, because I didn't have as much time here, it shows what adapters are supported. And in the US, level 3 connectors, it's either Tesla or it's this. And so if you buy a US car, or actually I say a non-Tesla car, it's going to have this connector. And starting in 2025, most of them are going to have Tesla connectors. So you can take advantage of that network.
Do all of these chargers charge all those different types of batteries that are coming down the pike?
They will, yeah. I mean, as the electronic, so it's not so much the batteries. Gary talked about the performance characteristics of the battery, but the battery management system and the converters is what makes the connection to the battery. So these charging networks are not going to change dramatically. Sorry.
So you've got a really good route planner. You shouldn't run out of fuel. But if you do, does AAA show up and charge you, or what happens?
I had that in my larger presentation. Yes, there actually is. I know there's one in Michigan. So they will dispatch a truck. I don't know how many of them there are, but most of the time what you hear is, first of all, when you tow an electric vehicle, it has to be on a bed. You can't disengage, or at least in the Tesla world, I'm not so sure I'm on the others, that you can't drag an EV on the road because of the motors. And so most of the stories I hear is somebody comes and picks you up and takes you to a charger. But there is, in my other presentation, I show some, but AAA actually has announced they have it. I'd heard two different words. That they tried it, they weren't going to do it, and then we got further information that they are now actually doing it. So go ahead, Gary.
Two comments. One, I did run out of charge once, and indeed they sent a tow that put me up on their bed and took me to the Ford dealer. My Mustang has the CCS connector, but Ford announced that starting next year they're going to allow me to buy a converter that will go from a Tesla charger into my Ford. And I think most of the other manufacturers,
I wouldn't be surprised. Well. So he's talking about a reverse of this. Mm-hmm. So this is for a Tesla to plug in a CCS connector. What he's talking about is a Tesla connector that you can plug in that goes into his CCS. So this is a male Tesla connector. He's talking about a female Tesla connector connected to a male CCS. This is just the opposite.
Sounds to me like in 20 years, there won't be, except for vintage old gasoline cars, there won't be any left. Does the infrastructure that we have of the electrical grid, with suddenly no more cars being driven by gasoline, suddenly they're all driven by electric, are we going to run out of electricity grid or both?
I can tell you that the utilities are, so right now it would be a problem. But I can tell you, and I'm on the board of BPW, everybody is, all the utilities are working on the issue, much as they have to upgrade the grid. There's lots of issues. I mean, talk about another class. There's just a lot there. They're going to respond. They are responding. And so all the, we're all going to die. And it's all, that's not true. Yes, if that all happened instantaneously right now, yes, it would be a problem. But I can tell you everybody's working on it. So, yes.
Have you noticed any substantial cost of your car insurance for an electric vehicle versus traditional?
Well, I've had some incidents that are my own doing. I don't know that so we replaced it really expensive. We replaced a high-end BMW. When I turned 65, I wanted to have a fancy car for a while, and that was wasted money. But so I didn't see a big change. And the other thing I would tell you about service, and Gary touched on this too, insurance so far isn't dramatically better. One of the things, because of all the batteries and because of the weight, it's a very robust car. And so you'll hear stories that they survive. I mean, there's the battery fires. I know there's all that drama, but it's very rare. But because of the batteries and the weight of the car, they survive accidents amazingly well, actually. But the other thing is the cost of operation of these cars is so much less than an ICE car. There's no oil changes. There's no regular service. Gary talked about it. We've had our car, now we spent some time in Florida. We've had our car for 2 years, and we took it in once to be lubed and for them to clean the brakes. Why? And this is what they recommend. The reason they clean the brakes is because of the regenerative braking. So when you take your foot off the gas on an EV, you don't coast. There's no such thing as coasting. And so as soon as you take your foot off the gas, the motors become generators. And so the drag of the generator slows you down. That's the biggest difference in driving an EV car, is getting accustomed to that. How do you approach a stop sign? What I would tell you is that your brakes only are used about 5% of the time, physical putting brakes on, than what you're accustomed to. And so Tesla's point is, if you ever got in a serious situation, make sure your brakes are in good shape. So they want to look at your brakes. They would like to look at your brakes once a year. I can't remember, was it $250 to lube and clean the brakes? Oh, and do it, rotate the tires. Gary mentioned that too. So that's all we do. There's no oil change. There's no nothing. You pour in some, windshield wipers, another high cost item. But that's it.
What I found mentioned the difference in getting used to the no braking.
Yes.
I tested a Kia.
Yes.
There's a setting on there where you can set the degree of braking you might need, so you can gradually get used to it.
That's exactly correct. We have friends that they were telling us about the same thing, and I test drove his car, and I had to put it to the most extreme case to be like the Tesla. And even then, the drag wasn't as much as on our Tesla when you took the extreme setting. But yeah, I forgot that is available in those cars.
Dave?
Hello?
I had the Honda Clarity plug-in hybrid.
Oh, that's right.
Which I passed on to my grandson. It currently has 139,000 miles on it. And when we transferred it, I asked Crown to check everything out. They said the brakes are like new.
Yeah.
Because they're never used.
You don't. Yes.
That gentleman asked about what the oil and gas companies are saying.
Yeah.
And also a couple of weeks ago, we had a presentation by somebody from Padnos, and they said, we're not going to be crushing cars for the metal because they're going to be all plastic.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, we did. Randy was talking about that. And so, yeah, the mix of materials in the cars are changing, but there's still an awful lot of metal in the cars. But yeah, I haven't paid as much attention to that. So my other side of the world is, I worry about utilities and grids, and so I haven't focused as much on that.
Dave, about the batteries and the metals that are required.
Yes.
So the lithium supply is limited.
Yes.
There's an increasing number of batteries being built, especially in Holland. What about the supply of lithium? Is it decreasing fast enough that it may not meet the demand? And I understand that there are others that are coming along.
Yeah. There is the whole issue as where lithium is available and so forth. I would also tell you that there's major recycling going on of EV batteries. In fact, many of I can't remember what the percentage is now. I want to say 30 or 40% of the batteries and Teslas you buy today came out of the recycled batteries. I can't remember that. Do you know that number? It's a high. I mean, I was surprised. But there's a lot of recycling that goes on. But yeah, the biggest thing for the materials, and Gary really kind of hit on it, is the batteries evolve. But is there enough? I believe there's enough. It's getting the mining operations and the processing operations and what countries are they in, and you can get into all sorts of drama about that. But yeah, it is an issue. But there's so much work going on in other battery technologies. I don't think long-term it's going to be a problem.
Thank you. I have two questions. One is about your lithium thing, because lithium is available throughout the whole world.
Yeah.
Anytime you see bromine, you're going to see lithium.
Yes.
In the sea, in the state of Michigan, bromine was the founding element for Dow Chemical. So the underground here is probably have lithium.
Don't ever debate with a chemist.
And my
A
second.
really good chemist, by the way.
Thank you. By the way, there's a different thing about, I want to point out is the Camry hybrid.
Yes,
I own Camry hybrid for several different models.
yes.
In the 2020, XLE maximum I could get is about 48 to 49 miles per gallon.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty good. But what my current one is 2022 LE version, which is a lithium battery.
Yeah.
That's lighter. I'm getting 53.
Are you?
Yes.
Yeah. It's amazing.
It is
Because
amazing.
I had a Gen 1 and I thought it was really cool. And it's amazing how they've perfected that technology.
The question I have is, when would you use the brake in a total EV, like in a panic stop?
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. Once you learn, you coast, and I'm a more aggressive driver than she is, and she'll get nervous and so forth. But no, once you get accustomed to it, you know how to back off the accelerator and to come to a stop sign and so forth. But if in an emergency situation, yeah, you still use them, but so infrequently.
And I will also add, when the battery is charged 100%,
Oh,
there is
yes.
no regenerative braking. So you
Yes.
have to use the brake then. So that's kind of a shocker.
Yes.
when
Yeah, that's a
when
very
you're
good
used to not
point.
using the brake.
Yeah, we got too many microphones. What she pointed out is really important to understand. When we set up to go on a long trip and you charge it to 100%, there's nothing to do. The regenerative braking doesn't work because there's no place to put the energy. And there's now a parameter through a software update to say, do you want the brakes to simulate what it would be if you didn't have a full charge? And so I haven't turned that switch on yet, but have you tried that, Bill? It works. Yeah, because once you get accustomed to it, and we'll pull out of our neighborhood and go, oh, no brakes today, because you forget. You plugged it in, you set it all up, and it happens automatically at night. And you get in the car, and it's nothing. Day's no different. And then you go, whoa, wait a minute, I got to stop. It's not a big deal, but it's different. Yeah.
In my Mustang, there's a setting I can either choose to have it do one pedal driving, or I can choose to coast when I let off. I choose coasting.
Oh, okay.
And the braking never changes no matter what the level of battery is. Braking is always the same.
In your car. Okay. Yeah.
It's very similar to an ICE vehicle.
Yeah. Other questions? We've gone way over. Sorry about that.
We have I have to make an announcement here too. Are you done, David?
I think so.
Is he done? Anything else? And Gary?
And to my partner, the brains behind the operation.
Well, thanks a lot to Gary and Dave for telling us all about charging and the new vehicles. And speaking of new vehicles, we're going to have a showcase a week from today, same time. Ian's got some information for you about where you can actually go see these vehicles. You have quite a lineup, right, Gary? 13 cars, which is a huge bump from the past couple of years, isn't it? So we'll have 13 vehicles. You can come look. I think there's going to be all versions of the Teslas except for the Cybertruck, and but those, probably the Mustang. A couple of Rivians are going to be there. No Rivians, okay. Anyway, Ian's got a map that he wants to share with you to show where you're going to find the showcase next week. It's a little different than it was last year. Other than that, I want to thank you, everybody, for coming today. Hopefully we'll see you all next Thursday to look at these cars.